Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Strategic Labs, the channel where we deeply analyze the ideas, narratives, and strategies behind the documents. We are Sarah and Mark. Today, we're going to dive into the material we have on the table. Before we start, please leave a like, share the episode, subscribe to the channel, and remember to check the description for the links to access the original material.
So imagine you actually managed to capture the most dangerous, the most well-funded fugitive on the entire planet.
Right. The ultimate prize.
Exactly. And you lock him inside this maximum security fortress. I mean, we're talking thick concrete walls, armed guards everywhere, constant camera surveillance, you name it.
A highest level of security possible.
Yeah. And then a year later, that prisoner literally just vanishes. He steps into a shower, drops down this perfectly cut hole in the floor, and escapes.
It's just wild to think about.
Right. He goes through a mile-long, fully ventilated, illuminated tunnel that was somehow excavated right under the boots of the national military.
Which sounds completely made up. I mean, it sounds like a Hollywood script.
It really does.
Mm-hmm.
But today, we're looking at why that isn't fiction. It's a terrifying reality of, well, systemic intelligence failure.
Yeah, and when you hear a story like that, the instinct is to just think it's this crazy anomaly. We look at the headlines coming out of Mexico, the violence, the shootouts, the prison breaks, and it's so easy to just dismiss it as random.
As just chaotic lawlessness.
Exactly. But the material we are diving into today completely shatters that assumption. We're looking at excerpts from Edward H. Whitmore's 2026 book, Covert Operations Series, Mexico, Inside the Shadow Wars, Cartels, and Intelligence Operations That Shape a Nation.
That's a heavy title.
It is, and Whitmore's entire argument is that there is absolutely nothing random about this violence.
Not at all. I mean, what we are witnessing is an incredibly sophisticated, undeclared shadow war.
Right.
We are looking at cartels utilizing intelligence, counterintelligence, and, advanced paramilitary tactics that most conventional state armies would genuinely struggle to counter.
So to really grasp the reality of this, let's just drop right into the scenario Whitmore uses to open the book.
The Culiacan raid.
Yeah, the Culiacan raid. Picture this. You're looking at 2:30 in the morning in the capital of Sinaloa. The air is thick, it's humid, pitch black outside.
Just absolute darkness in these neighborhoods.
Right, and you're watching a convoy of unmarked SUVs silently gliding through these very impoverished, shadowed streets. And inside these vehicles, you don't just have a couple of local cops on a beat.
No, it's a completely different level of operation.
It's a highly complex, highly fragmented tactical team. You have military intelligence operatives sitting literally shoulder to shoulder with undercover agents from CISN.
Which is Mexico's civilian intelligence agency.
Exactly.
And what's really crucial to understand about this convoy is the intelligence they are actually acting on. It's not some clean, confirmed dossier handed down from above.
Oh, not at all.
It's a puzzle. It's pieced together from highly disparate sources. I mean, they are moving based on a wiretap intercepted a week ago, a weird financial anomaly flagged in some shell company's bank account, and a whispered tip from a rival informant.
Who may or may not be setting them up.
Right. You never really know.
And while they are rolling through the streets of Culiacan, you have the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, sitting safely across the border.
Watching from afar.
Yeah, they provided some of that initial wiretap data, but they are physically totally removed from the operation. So on the ground, the Mexican military brings in these elite special forces.
Hoping for a surgical strike.
Right, aiming for a surgical strike on a compound run by a cartel faction known as Los Chapultepec. You've got the CISN analysts back at a command post looking at live drone feeds.
It sounds perfect on paper.
On paper, it sounds like this high-tech, flawless military thriller. Right. The convoy splits up. One team goes to set a decoy. The other team moves to encircle the compound, and then
Everything just goes sideways.
Yeah. The reality of the urban warfare environment just violently snaps them awake.
Because the illusion of control evaporates in seconds. The military breaches the perimeter, but the cartel isn't caught off guard. At all.
They were waiting for them.
Gunfire erupts immediately. But it's not, panicked spray and pray shooting from street thugs. It is a highly calculated, disciplined ambush.
They had snipers, right?
Yes. The cartel has snipers positioned on adjacent rooftops using AK-47s and high-caliber rifles to lay down suppressive fire. They are physically pinning the military down with tactical precision.
Which is insane.
And inside the actual compound, the target isn't just cowering in a closet hoping it ends. They have reinforced walls, secure rooms, and an underground tunnel network pre-built for exactly this scenario.
Meanwhile, the CISN operatives sitting in those unmarked SUVs are frantically trying to deploy electronic countermeasures.
Right, they're trying to jam the signals.
Yeah, trying to jam the cartel's radios and cell phones, but the cartel is countering them in real time.
It's a full-on electronic warfare element.
Exactly. They aren't just shooting. They are actively managing their own command and control network while under fire.
And remember that decoy team the military sent out to secure the perimeter?
Oh yeah, what happened to them?
They get hit too. They are lured into a massive secondary ambush by a completely different cartel-allied faction in a neighboring district.
Wow. So it was a coordinated distraction.
Completely. The cartel is intentionally inflicting casualties miles away just to delay the state's reinforcements from reaching the main compound.
That is just, it's a military maneuver.
It is. And eventually the shooting stops. The state forces manage to seize the compound. They find weapons, encrypted communication devices, piles of cash.
But no actual targets.
Right. The high-value cartel lieutenants literally slipped away through the city's sewer system and those pre-planned tunnels.
And I think the craziest part is what happens just a few hours later.
Yeah, the aftermath.
The sun comes up, the shell casings are literally swept away off the streets, the local businesses roll up their metal grates, people walk out to buy their morning coffee.
Like nothing happened.
The city just absorbs the war, and the citizens are left completely bewildered about who's actually running their city.
That Culiacan raid perfectly encapsulates the core thesis of Whitmore's analysis.
Yeah.
I mean, this isn't a battle of law enforcement trying to arrest criminals.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second.
Sure.
Because when you strip away the drones, the encrypted radios, and the fancy terminology, isn't this really just rival gangs shooting each other over drug money? I mean, isn't it just a very violent, very lucrative economic dispute at its core?
Well, that assumption is the exact trap that conventional narratives and even, frankly, some top-level policymakers fall into.
Really?
Yeah, and it's exactly why the state consistently fails to contain the problem. Whitmore introduces a concept here called the multiplicity of actors.
Okay, what does that mean?
To understand this conflict, you have to look at the overlapping matrix of power and realize that none of the players are unified.
So it's not a two-sided war.
Not even close. Let's look at the state first. We tend to think of the government as a monolith, right? The good guys, acting as one unit. But the Mexican state apparatus in this context is deeply internally fractured.
Right, because in that raid we just talked about, you had CISN, with civilian intelligence, and you had military intelligence, and they aren't necessarily playing on the same team.
Often they're actively competing. CISN's trying to gather long-term civilian intelligence. They want to map networks, follow the money.
It's about the big picture.
Exactly. But the military intelligence apparatus usually favors kinetic, explosive action. They just want to hit targets and make arrests.
Right.
Then you have local municipal police who are deeply vulnerable to local coercion and, frankly, corruption. You have federal police with their own distinct jurisdictional agendas.
So they're all stepping on each other's toes.
Worse than that, these state entities are frequently fighting each other for budget allocations, political favor, and operational jurisdiction just as fiercely as they are fighting the cartels.
And Whitmore points out that sometimes military units will intentionally bypass the civilian intelligence agencies entirely.
Yeah, they'll freeze them out.
They will work directly with foreign actors like the DEA just to protect their own operational security, because they just assume the civilian agencies are leaking information to the cartels.
Which happens a lot.
It's like a sports team where the offensive line absolutely refuses to share the playbook with the defensive line because they think the defense is taking bribes from the opposing team.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. So you have a fractured state. Then on the second layer of this matrix, you have the cartels themselves. And we really have to stop calling them gangs.
Because there's so much more than that now.
They have evolved so far beyond simple smuggling rings. They're operating as quasi-governments.
Right.
They control physical territory. They levy taxes, though, obviously. Yeah. They call it extortion or derecho de piso.
Protection money, basically.
Yeah, but on a massive institutional scale. They provide a twisted, draconian brand of local security to the populations they control. And they possess heavily armed, highly trained paramilitary wings.
And then there's the third layer, the foreign actors.
Right?
You've got the DEA, the CIA, transnational criminal syndicates from Europe and Asia sourcing the raw chemicals, and even foreign intelligence services from rival geopolitical nations.
Nations who are looking to exploit the instability right on the U.S. border.
Exactly.
So every single one of these actors of the fractured state, the quasi-sovereign cartels, the foreign operatives, is manipulating this incredibly dense, fragmented environment.
It's a mess.
It is. So it's not just guys fighting over a duffel bag of cash. It is a complex ecosystem of power brokers, mercenaries, and shadow operatives. Alliances shift daily.
So it's a ceaseless competition for dominance in a space where the rules of conventional warfare simply do not apply. Okay, so if cartels are operating like these shadow governments today, with counterintelligence divisions, encrypted comms, and paramilitary wings, how did they actually get here?
It took decades of evolution.
Right, because they didn't just magically appear with sniper battalions and drone technology. How does a group of guys running marijuana across the border in the 1970s turn into a paramilitary behemoth capable of taking on the national army?
Well, to map that evolution, Whitmore takes us back to a very specific turning point, which is the 1980s and the rise of the Guadalajara cartel.
The pioneers, in
Yeah.
a dark way.
Yeah. Before this era, the criminal landscape in Mexico was incredibly fragmented. It was a localized mosaic.
Just small-time operations?
Mostly, yeah.
Yeah.
You had dozens of small, loosely affiliated gangs. One family controlled a specific valley, another controlled a specific border crossing. They worked autonomously.
And they occasionally fought over local turf?
Right, but the violence was sporadic and very localized. It wasn't a national security threat.
But then you get figures like Miguel Angel, Felix Gallardo, Rafael Paro Quintero, and Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo.
The founders of the modern cartel structure.
And reading about them, you realize these men were not just street thugs. They were visionaries, in the absolute darkest, most destructive sense of the word.
Oh, absolutely.
They looked at this chaotic, fragmented mosaic of smugglers and just saw immense inefficiency. They realized that if they could consolidate these disparate groups, if they could bring them all under one centralized, corporate-style hierarchy, they could completely dominate the hemisphere.
They approached organized crime the exact same way a CEO approaches a corporate merger.
Exactly.
They recognized that true territorial control wasn't just about having guys with guns standing on a dirt road. It was about mastering the logistics of supply chains, understanding the local political ecosystems, and above all, controlling intelligence.
So they created specialized divisions.
Yeah, they implemented a strict division of labor. They built cells dedicated solely to transportation logistics. They had accountants dedicated just to money laundering, and entirely separate cells dedicated to political corruption and reconnaissance.
And this is where the weaponization of information really takes off in the book. Whitmore stresses that the Guadalajara cartel didn't rely strictly on brute force.
Because brute force is loud and it's expensive.
Right. Instead, they embedded intelligence gathering into their corporate infrastructure. They actively recruited informants within the federal police, the customs agencies, and local government offices.
They were running full-scale espionage operations.
They were intercepting law enforcement radio transmissions. They literally figured out how to anticipate federal movements before the police even left their precincts.
And that is the crucial shift. The symbiotic relationship between intelligence and violence becomes the engine of this new shadow war. Well, Whitmore notes that in this environment, violence is rarely random. It is the tangible, kinetic outcome of extensive intelligence gathering. A firefight doesn't just happen because two guys bumped into each other. It is framed by prior reconnaissance.
So they know exactly what they're walking into.
Usually, yes. And conversely, every violent engagement serves as an intelligence gathering mechanism.
Right. If the cartel's hitmen get into a shootout with the military and manage to repel them, they aren't just celebrating a victory.
No, they're analyzing it.
They're analyzing the engagement, they are calculating the military's response times, they are noting what caliber weapons the soldiers brought, what tactical formations they used to breach the building, and where their blind spots are.
Exactly. They use the violence to map the state's capabilities.
It creates a permanent evolutionary arms race. And the most dramatic, terrifying leap in that arms race came a bit later, with the emergence of a group called Las Zetas.
Yeah, the Zetas changed everything.
The chapter on Las Zetas is genuinely chilling. Because if the Guadalajara cartel introduced the corporate structure, Los Zetas introduced absolute, uncompromising military doctrine.
They fundamentally changed the DNA of the cartel landscape.
Where did they come from?
They were originally founded by ex-military personnel.
Mm.
Specifically, deserters from the GAFE, the Grupo Aeromóvil de Fuerzas Especiales.
Which are the elite special forces in Mexico?
Exactly. These were elite Mexican special forces units.
Hmm.
And what's critical to understand is that these soldiers had received world-class international training, including counterinsurgency and advanced tactical training from the U.S. and other nations.
Wow, so they weren't criminals who learned how to shoot on the streets.
Not at all.
They were elite, highly conditioned soldiers who decided the private sector paid better.
Yeah, it was a pure mercenary move at first.
When they defected to become the armed enforcement wing of the Gulf Cartel, and later their own independent organization, they brought everything with them. They brought strict military discipline, advanced urban combat tactics, and a profound understanding of operational security.
They introduced standardized training camps for their recruits.
Like boot camps.
Literally boot camps. They instituted the use of advanced encrypted communications. They utilized synchronized multi-domain operations, meaning they could coordinate an attack using vehicles, snipers, and electronic jamming simultaneously.
This is terrifying.
They completely blurred the line between a criminal enterprise and an active, capable insurgency.
And because Los Zetas were so ruthlessly effective, they forced every other major organization to adapt or die.
It was an arms race.
The Sinaloa cartel, the remnants of the Gulf cartel, they all had to suddenly militarize their own ranks just to survive the Zetas. They had to start hiring their own mercenaries, buying heavy weaponry like 50 caliber sniper rifles and rocket-propelled grenades.
And investing heavily in signals intelligence, or SIGINT.
Right, they started building vast networks of radio antennas across the country just to intercept state communications and track rival movements.
It was a massive escalation.
Yeah.
But while they were militarizing, they were also developing a mastery over a completely different domain of warfare, which is the psychological domain.
Okay, hold on. Here's where it gets really interesting, because this is the part of Whitmore's analysis that I really struggled to reconcile at first.
The propaganda element.
Yes.
Yeah.
We are talking about these organizations becoming incredibly sophisticated. They are acting like elite special forces, using encrypted comms, running counterintelligence networks, and operating in the deep shadows because their survival depends on avoiding state detection.
Right, they want to stay hidden.
But then there's an entire chapter on information and propaganda. And Whitmore details how these exact same covert organizations will hang gruesome, massive narco banners in public squares.
Yeah, in broad daylight.
They will leave mutilated bodies hanging from highway overpasses. They will produce and upload these highly choreographed, terrifying threat videos to social media.
It feels like a massive contradiction, doesn't it?
Completely. If your entire corporate survival relies on covert intelligence, operational security, and securing your smuggling routes in the shadows, why on earth do you hang a 20-foot banner in the middle of a town square explicitly taking credit for a hit?
It seems counterintuitive.
Why be so incredibly loud, public, and visible if your goal is to remain invisible?
It is a brilliant paradox to point out, and Whitmore's deconstruction of this is deeply unsettling. He explains that this public brutality, the Marco banners, the social media videos, they are not a lapse in covert strategy.
So it's not just undisciplined foot soldiers showing off.
No, not at all. They are a highly calculated core component of their operational doctrine. It is psychological operations, psyops.
Wow.
In an asymmetric war where you cannot defeat the state's army in a traditional pitched battle, information and human perception become your primary weapons.
So the cruelty is the point, but it's weaponized cruelty.
Yeah, precisely. Let's break down the mechanics of a narco banner. When a cartel hangs a banner over a busy highway or disseminates a brutal execution video, they are achieving several strategic objectives simultaneously.
Like what?
First, on a tactical level, they are intimidating rival factions. They are proving that their intelligence network was superior, that they could locate specific rivals, eliminate them, and display them without the state stopping them.
Showing off their reach.
Right. But the second, much more important objective is the erosion of state legitimacy.
Right. Think about the psychology of a local municipal police officer who has to drive to work. He is underpaid, outgunned, and he drives his squad car under an overpass where a cartel has hung a banner that basically says, "We know who you are, we own this city, and the military can't protect you."
That officer is instantly neutralized as a threat to the cartel, not by a bullet, but by terror.
Exactly. The message to the local population, the police, and local politicians is unmistakable. They're saying, look at what we did in the geographic center of your city in broad daylight, and the state could do absolutely nothing to stop us. The government is a phantom. We are the true permanent authority here.
They are actively forcing the civilian population into a state of paralyzed observation.
Paralysis is the goal.
Yes, if you are a citizen and you witness that level of visceral violence executed with total impunity, you are not going to call an anonymous tip hotline.
Definitely not.
You are not going to report suspicious activity to the local garrison. You're going to keep your head down and survive.
And Whitmore notes that entire towns have essentially been depopulated or their social fabric completely silenced just from waves of these narco messages.
For tragic.
The cartels managed to seize cognitive control of a territory without having to fire a single shot at the military.
It is the ultimate manifestation of information warfare. They are highly adept at using local cultural symbols, specific regional dialects, and even twisted religious iconography in these messages to embed themselves into the social fabric.
They know exactly how to speak to the people.
They do. They want the population caught in a permanent state of terror and fatalism. And think about how the state responds to this.
Usually with a press conference.
Exactly. The government will issue a polished press release. A spokesperson in a suit will stand at a podium in Mexico City and announce that a certain tonnage of narcotics was seized or a mid-level boss was arrested, and they will declare, "We are winning the war."
But the state is battling decades of systemic public distrust. If the government spokesperson says, "We are in control," but the citizen walks outside and sees a cartel banner declaring, "We own this plaza," backed by the undeniable visceral evidence of violence.
The citizen is going to believe the banner.
Every single time. The state's narrative just cannot compete with the cartel's psychological reality.
It entirely redefines the concept of a battlefield. The battlefield is no longer just a physical smuggling corridor or a border crossing. The battlefield is the cognitive perception, the morale, and the psychology of the people living within that corridor.
And when you trace this evolution from the corporate structuring of the Guadalajara cartel to the absolute militarization brought by Los Zetas to this sophisticated mastery of psychological warfare, it becomes painfully, abundantly clear why the state security forces struggle so mightily.
It's an uneven match.
Which leads us to a massive question. If the state's intelligence apparatus is as fragmented and culturally divided as we discussed earlier, what actually happens when they are forced to go toe-to-toe with these adapted paramilitary organizations in the real world?
Well, the historical record, as Whitmore details through several extensive case studies, is a deeply flawed tapestry.
To put it mildly.
Yeah, it is a mix of spectacular operational failures, fleeting tactical triumphs, and a pervasive, dangerous illusion of control.
Where do we even start to see this breakdown?
To understand the modern dynamic of these real-world clashes, we really have to look at the watershed moment that fundamentally broke the system. We have to look at the event that permanently altered the trajectory of cross-border intelligence sharing.
Which was?
The 1985 kidnapping of DEA agent Kiki Camarena.
Right, Enrique Kiki Camarena. His story is so pivotal.
It really is the dividing line in history.
He was an American DEA agent embedded in Guadalajara in the early 1980s, and he was incredibly effective.
He was doing incredible work.
He was deeply penetrating the Guadalajara cartel's networks. He was utilizing human intelligence, finding informants, and uncovering these massive marijuana plantations and cocaine labs. He was mapping the corruption that connected the cartel to local politicians.
He got too close.
Way too close. And then, in broad daylight, he is abducted off the street. He is brutally tortured for days and murdered.
It's horrific.
And Whitmore frames this not just as a horrific personal tragedy, but as a seismic geopolitical shockwave that exposed the absolute rot within the Mexican state apparatus.
It was the moment the veil of plausible deniability was permanently ripped away.
The U.S. couldn't ignore it anymore.
Exactly. The immediate aftermath and the subsequent massive investigation revealed that this wasn't just a bold, rogue move by a few cartel hitmen.
No.
The operation to kidnap, interrogate, and murder a U.S. federal agent was facilitated by extensive, undeniable state collusion.
The details are staggering.
The investigation uncovered that local police literally provided the perimeter security for the kidnapping.
Which is just, wow.
Intelligence officers from the DFS, the Mexican Federal Security Directorate at the time, turned a blind eye or actively participated. High-ranking officials who profited from the cartel's vast wealth provided political cover.
It proved to the world that the Guadalajara cartel wasn't hiding from the state. They were operating hand in hand with elements of it.
They were practically partners.
They enjoyed a form of strategic autonomy, shielded by the very institutions that were publicly mandated to destroy them. And the reaction from the United States fundamentally changed the mechanical rules of engagement for intelligence operations.
Because the trust deficit became insurmountable.
Right.
Suddenly, the U.S. intelligence apparatus realized that sharing sensitive human intelligence with their Mexican counterparts was essentially the same as handing it directly to the cartel bosses.
Because you didn't know who was on the payroll.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You couldn't tell a local police commander about an informant because that commander was likely working for the cartel. This forced a massive, unprecedented shift in how cross-border intelligence was gathered and utilized.
The U.S. had to pull back from relying heavily on human intelligence shared with local authorities because the human element was too deeply compromised by corruption.
So what did they do instead?
Instead, they started pushing for the creation of heavily vetted, compartmentalized joint task forces. They demanded extreme operational secrecy, and most importantly, they shifted their reliance toward technological surveillance.
They trusted the machines.
Yes, they leaned into wiretaps, signals intelligence, and high-altitude aerial reconnaissance. They trusted machines and intercepted radio waves more than they trusted the human beings inside the local agencies.
But even with this intensified, technologically driven cooperation, the underlying structural issues within Mexico's domestic agencies remained.
The fragmentation.
Right, and you see the catastrophic consequences of that internal fragmentation vividly in another case study Whitmore dissects, the botched 2010 Guadalajara raid.
Oh, reading the breakdown of this specific raid was absolutely infuriating.
It's hard to read.
It perfectly encapsulates everything that goes wrong when a fragmented intelligence system tries to execute a complex operation.
It is a textbook, tragic example of institutional dissonance. So the scenario is this. You have a joint state task force aiming to capture a specific mid-level Sinaloa cartel lieutenant hiding out in Guadalajara.
Okay.
CISN, the civilian intelligence agency, has been working the case. They have intercepted radio chatter, they have utilized their surveillance teams, and they have successfully pinpointed the target inside a specific safe house in a dense urban neighborhood.
Now, CISN's doctrine is based on patience, right?
Very much so.
They are intelligence analysts. They want to maintain discreet, clandestine surveillance on that safe house. They want to watch who comes and goes. They want to map the supply vehicles, identify the couriers, and build a comprehensive picture of the entire local network before they make a move.
They want to dismantle the infrastructure, not just grab one guy.
But on the other side of the task force, you have military intelligence, the DGIM, and they operate under a completely different cultural and operational mandate.
They are action-oriented.
Yes. They are riding high on previous rapid strike successes. They don't want to sit in a van for 3 weeks taking photographs. They want kinetic action. They want to kick the door down immediately, secure the target, and claim a victory.
So you have this massive cultural clash.
Exactly.
The cautious, politically accountable civilian agency is constantly bumping heads with the aggressive, fast-moving military unit. And because they fundamentally distrust each other's methodologies, the planning phase fractures.
They don't share all their operational details.
Right. And the execution of the raid is an unmitigated disaster. Whitmore details how mere moments after the military convoys breach the neighborhood perimeter, the element of surprise is completely gone.
The cartel already knew they were coming?
The cartel wasn't surprised at all. Why? Because cartel lookouts had been tipped off well in advance, highly likely by a corrupt local municipal official who noticed the staging of the military vehicles.
Unbelievable.
So as the military moves on the house, a massive urban firefight erupts.
But the most damning, incredible detail from Whitmore's forensic post-operation analysis isn't just the leak, it's the technology.
Oh, the radios.
While the bullets are flying, CISN operatives and the military intelligence units are trying to coordinate their movements. But they physically cannot.
Because of the equipment.
Right. Because they were using completely incompatible communication equipment.
They had entirely different proprietary encryption protocols on their radios.
They are in the middle of a life-or-death urban firefight, taking fire from cartel snipers, and the different branches of the government's task force cannot even speak to each other over the radio.
It's absurd.
They can't warn each other about flanking maneuvers. They can't coordinate a retreat. It creates these massive, fatal blind spots in their situational awareness.
It brings us back to that sports team analogy.
Yes. Not only are the offense and defense refusing to share the playbook, they are literally speaking different languages on the field while the opposing team scores.
And the result of this absolute chaos.
3 state operatives are severely wounded, the perimeter collapses, and the target easily escapes into the urban maze of Guadalajara.
And Whitmore highlights a crucial political dimension that drives this kind of failure. Like, why was the military in such a rush to begin with?
Because of the optics?
Exactly. Because the federal government was facing immense public and political pressure to show tangible victories in the broader war on drugs. Politicians needed headlines.
They needed to show they were doing something.
This systemic pressure incentivized the military to prioritize highly visible show arrests over the meticulous, time-consuming intelligence work required to actually dismantle the cartel's infrastructure. They wanted the optics of a dramatic raid, even if the intelligence wasn't fully baked and the coordination was non-existent.
Which plays right into the cartel's hands. The cartels understand the state's political pressures and operational impatience better than the state does.
Definitely.
However, to be fair to the historical record, Whitmore's book isn't solely a catalog of state failures. He does detail moments of sheer operational brilliance.
Yes, there are successes.
Specifically, he dedicates a massive section to the long, arduous, highly sophisticated hunt for Joaquin El Chapo Guzman.
Yeah, the tracking and initial capture of El Chapo is presented as the ultimate triumph of modern intelligence. It is a masterclass in what happens when multi-agency intelligence fusion actually works the way it is supposed to.
It wasn't just a fluke.
No, his capture was not the result of a lucky traffic stop or a random tip. It was a culmination of an incredibly intricate cross-border web of signals intelligence, financial tracking, and deeply embedded human intelligence.
It reads like science fiction. They weren't just looking for a man, they were hunting a ghost through data.
That's a great way to put it.
The joint U.S. and Mexican task forces were tracking his burner cell phones, decoding incredibly complex encrypted communications. They were utilizing predictive modeling based on satellite imagery.
The satellite stuff is amazing.
They would look at remote, mountainous geographic regions in Sinaloa and analyze satellite photos to see where new, unauthorized dirt roads were suddenly being built, or where unusual heavy vehicle traffic patterns were forming in the middle of nowhere.
They were tracking infrastructure changes.
Right. And they tracked the microscopic financial footprints of his vast network of shell companies.
They gathered all of the signals intelligence and they overlaid it with traditional, highly sensitive human.
They found an insider.
Yes. They managed to cultivate a trusted human informant deep inside the cartel's inner circle. When they combined the satellite data, the intercepted comms, and the human confirmation, they were able to pinpoint his exact safe house in Los Mochis.
And the raid itself.
When they finally moved in, the operation was a flawless execution of cross-border and interagency coordination. They breached the compound, neutralized the security, and captured the kingpin.
It was the ultimate victory. The system worked perfectly well until it didn't.
Right.
The triumph is almost immediately overshadowed by the subsequent, universally humiliating failure.
The infamous tunnel escape.
The tunnel escape from the Altiplano maximum security prison is perhaps the most profound illustration of the illusion of state control in this entire conflict. Think about the parameters.
It's hard to even fathom.
They captured the most wanted man on the planet. They put him in the absolute most secure facility the Mexican state possessed. And he literally vanished through a mile-long, professionally engineered, ventilated, and illuminated tunnel dug perfectly beneath the concrete floor of his shower grate.
Just walk away.
You read the logistical details of that escape, and you just have to shake your head in disbelief. How does a massive industrial engineering project happen right under the noses of military intelligence, prison wardens, and state security without a single alarm bell ringing?
We are talking about tons of displaced Earths.
The noise of drilling, the logistics of laying tracks and ventilation pipes.
Whitmore argues it was a catastrophic failure of human intelligence and interagency coordination, born from profound arrogance. Yes. The state relied entirely on the visible architecture of physical security. They trusted the thick concrete walls, the biometric locks, the cameras, and the armed guards on the towers.
They thought the fortress was enough.
But they had a massive, fatal blind spot when it came to human inside the prison's ecosystem. They completely failed to detect the sprawling, insidious web of corruption that was actively being woven around them.
The cartel used its infinite resources to compromise the very people guarding the fortress.
Everyone has a price.
They bribed or threatened construction workers to smuggle in specialized drilling tools. They compromised informants to provide the exact blueprints of the prison and the timing of guard rotations. They compromised the wardens and the monitor room operators to ignore the sounds of drilling and turn a blind eye to the camera feeds.
And once again, the military intelligence units and CSIN were operating in their isolated silos.
Because of course they were.
After the escape, audits revealed that there were fragmented reports. A guard had reported unusual noises. A local official had noted strange, heavy material deliveries to a cinder block house a mile away from the prison walls.
But no one connected the dots.
Because the agencies were not communicating, no one put the puzzle pieces together until the cell was empty. It proved conclusively that cartels don't just fight on the streets with bullets. They fight by infiltrating, corrupting, and hollowing out the very institutions designed to contain them.
And this brings us to one of the most critical analytical concepts Whitmore explores in the book.
The Hydra effect.
Yes. The capture of high-value targets like El Chapo is always celebrated by politicians as a definitive war-winning victory. But Whitmore introduces a concept called the Hydra effect and discusses the profound paradox of decapitation strategies.
The decapitation strategy is a fascinating failure of applying conventional doctrine to an unconventional threat.
Exactly. So I want to pause and just ask this directly, thinking through the logic of Whitmore's argument. If capturing the boss, the ultimate kingpin, actually makes the situation on the ground worse, if it just fractures the cartel, creates massive power vacuums, and causes civilian violence to absolutely spike as all the lieutenants go to war with each other over the empty throne,
Which happens every time.
then what is the point of these high-value target operations? If winning a tactical battle actively loses you the broader war for stability, why does the state keep launching these massive manhunts?
That is the central agonizing paradox of this shadow war. The decapitation strategy, the idea that removing the head of the organization solves the problem, is based entirely on conventional 20th century warfare doctrine.
Like fighting a traditional army.
Exactly. The logic is, if you take out the enemy general, the enemy army loses its command structure, its roots, and it collapses. But cartels are not conventional armies with rigid chains of succession.
They're a network.
They are complex, highly adaptive, decentralized networks. When you remove a charismatic, centralizing figure like El Chapo, you absolutely do not destroy the Sinaloa cartel. You fracture it.
You create the Hydra. You cut off one head, 3 more grow back, and they immediately start biting each other.
Precisely. Let's look at the mechanics of the power vacuum. When a kingpin is in power, he enforces a certain level of internal discipline. He regulates the disputes between his plaza bosses.
He keeps the peace, relatively speaking.
Right. When he is suddenly removed, that centralized authority vanishes instantly. The lieutenants, who command their own heavily armed factions, suddenly scramble to seize control over the incredibly lucrative trafficking corridors. The internal communication breaks down.
And the immediate result of that internal scrambling is horrific violence in the streets.
Exactly. The lieutenants start assassinating each other's operators to consolidate power. Furthermore, this internal chaos sends a massive signal to rival cartels.
They smell blood in the water.
Yes. The Jalisco New Generation cartel, for example, sees the internal war within Sinaloa and realizes that their borders are vulnerable. So they launch an external offensive to take over the weakened territory. You get a multi-front war erupting overnight simply because you arrested one man.
So, to answer the question of why they keep doing it, part of it is that intense political pressure we talked about earlier.
The need for headlines.
The government needs to show the public and their international partners that they are doing something. Arresting a famous kingpin generates incredible headlines.
It looks like a win.
But the flaw in the doctrine is that without a holistic strategy, a strategy that aggressively addresses the systemic corruption, dismantles the financial networks, and closes the intelligence gaps, a high-value capture is merely a temporary tactical disruption.
It is not a strategic solution.
Whitmore proves over and over that in this ecosystem, tactical victories absolutely do not equal strategic stability.
And that realization is incredibly sobering. When you trace the entire narrative we've discussed today, from the chaotic, multi-faction shootouts in the streets of Culiacan, through the corporate consolidation of the Guadalajara cartel, the terrifying military evolution of Los Zetas, and the systemic intelligence failures of the modern state.
You see a profoundly outmatched system.
We see a state apparatus that is deeply fragmented, fighting an enemy that is endlessly adaptable and completely unconstrained by the rule of law. It leaves you feeling like this isn't a traditional war that is ever going to end with a formal peace treaty signed on the deck of a battleship.
So what does this all mean? Which leads us directly into Whitmore's final and arguably most terrifying reflection in the book. He concludes that this is an undeclared, permanent shadow war.
Permanent.
There is no traditional end state visible on the horizon because the very nature of the conflict is built on endless cycles of escalation.
The cycles of escalation. Whitmore details the historical pattern perfectly. Whenever the violence in a specific region gets too high, the state decides to deploy the military in mass numbers.
They flood the zone.
They send in convoys of troops to occupy a city. And initially, it works as a temporary suppressant. It puts a heavy lid on the violence for a brief moment because the cartels generally don't want to engage battalions in open warfare.
It's bad for business.
Right. But that overwhelming state force inevitably sparks ferocious, calculated retaliations.
Because the cartels don't just surrender and give up their billions of dollars. They retreat into the mountains or the deep urban shadows. They study the military's new patrol routes.
They gather intel.
They analyze their tactics, they adapt, and then they strike back with asymmetric warfare. They use improvised explosive devices against military convoys. They launch targeted assassinations against the police chiefs coordinating the troops.
The massive military presence doesn't defeat them.
No, it acts as an evolutionary pressure cooker that forces the cartels to become even deadlier, more sophisticated, and more ruthless.
And this endless, violent cycle of escalation and adaptation is currently pushing the conflict into entirely new, terrifying frontiers.
The future of the conflict.
Yeah, in his final chapter on the future, Whitmore outlines how the tactics of this shadow war are rapidly evolving far beyond physical bullets, highway blockades, and territorial control. The battlefield is actively migrating into the digital and technological realms.
This was the part of the book that truly kept me awake at night. We are moving from AK-47s to advanced cyber warfare.
It's the next frontier.
Whitmore talks about intelligence, indicating that cartels are actively developing the capability to launch cyber attacks on municipal infrastructure. Imagine a cartel hacking into a city's power grid to plunge entire districts into darkness just minutes before they launch a massive raid.
It blinds the state's cameras and throws the military into chaos.
Exactly. And he discusses the imminent threat of AI-driven deepfakes.
The psychological operations we discussed earlier with the narco banners are about to become exponentially more sophisticated.
With AI.
Imagine a cartel generating a hyper-realistic AI-generated video of a high-ranking military general confessing to taking bribes and colluding with a rival faction. They release that onto social media.
Even if the state proves it's fake a week later, the damage is done.
The trust is broken. They can instantly destroy the state's credibility overnight without firing a single weapon.
And while the state is trying to counter this by investing in biometric tracking, facial recognition cameras, and massive digital surveillance networks, Whitmore points out the fatal flaw.
The human element again.
The cartels will inevitably seek to subvert these very systems. They won't just try to hack the firewalls. They will use their infinite cash to simply bribe or coerce the low-level IT contractors and insiders who manage the state's databases.
They will turn the state's surveillance apparatus into their own intelligence gathering tool.
We are looking at a near future where these covert operations are fought simultaneously across physical, digital, and psychological domains.
And we really cannot ignore the massive international dimension here, which makes this required reading for literally everyone, regardless of where they live.
It's not just a regional issue.
This isn't a localized issue that stays south of the border. Whitmore extensively details how these cartel networks are deeply, inextricably intertwined with the modern global economy. They manage incredibly complex global supply chains.
Like with fentanyl.
Yes. The trafficking of synthetic opioids like fentanyl requires the logistical smuggling of precursor chemicals from factories in Asia, routed through shell companies in Europe, and moved through international shipping ports.
It's a massive global enterprise.
They are laundering billions of dollars through legitimate international financial institutions, real estate markets, and cryptocurrency exchanges.
And it gets even more complicated when you factor in global geopolitics. Foreign adversaries of the United States and the West are beginning to recognize the incredible asymmetric utility of these cartels.
The proxy war element.
Whitmore notes that international intelligence channels have detected communications between certain cartel factions and operatives from foreign nations with vested interests in destabilizing the Western Hemisphere.
These foreign state actors view the cartels as incredibly incredibly effective proxies.
They can sow chaos, distract U.S. security apparatuses, and flood the border with instability. In exchange, these foreign operatives can offer the cartels advanced cyber tools, military-grade weaponry, or money laundering networks.
It completely elevates the conflict from a regional drug war to a massive theater of global asymmetric warfare.
Which leads us to the ultimate paradigm-shifting question that Whitmore's analysis forces us to confront.
The big question.
Exactly. And it's a thought that has been rattling around in my brain ever since I closed this book. It's a chilling concept, but we have to look at the reality of the board in front of us.
Right.
If these cartels are successfully operating as complex shadow governments,
Yeah.
if they are utilizing elite special forces military doctrine, if they are executing highly sophisticated cyber warfare and psychological operations,
If they are managing massive, multi-billion-dollar global supply chains.
and if they're actively engaging in backdoor international diplomacy with foreign geopolitical adversaries, at what point do we, as a global society, have to stop classifying them merely as organized crime?
It's a powerful point.
At what point do our international legal frameworks have to catch up and start recognizing them as sovereign stateless powers? Because if you treat a highly adaptive sovereign military power like a localized street gang, you are going to lose the war every single time.
That is a profound, deeply unsettling question. And it is exactly the kind of radical, critical reevaluation of our basic assumptions that Whitmore's work demands of its readers.
It is an incredible amount of information to process. We started today by unpacking the comforting myth of chaotic, random violence and traveled deep into the terrifying reality of paramilitary intelligence.
We covered a lot of ground.
We examined the systemic, dangerous fragmentation of state security forces, the culture clashes, the incompatible radios, the political pressures. We saw how cartels evolved from corporate logistics experts to militarized insurgencies running psychological terror campaigns.
And finally, we stared into the very chilling future of digital, borderless shadow wars.
If you think of national security like a medical diagnosis, we were looking at an X-ray of a body completely at war with itself, adapting to every cure and mutating infinitely faster than the medicine can be applied.
Well said.
We've reached the end of this analysis. If this episode added value to your day, please leave a like, share it, and subscribe to Strategic Labs so we can keep deconstructing narratives. Remember to check the video description. See you in the next analysis.